Every action has a consequence. Usually it's small, but today we're studying 10 people whose final action had a consequence that was permanent. This isn't just a list of fails. It's a high-speed physics lesson where the final grade is pass or fail, and there are no retakes. These are real stories with fatal results. This video is a graphic demonstration of what not to do. 1. The tale of the DIY dentist who performed his own and final extraction is a story that proves the internet can be a very dangerous place, especially when it convinces you that you're a qualified surgeon after watching one 10-minute YouTube tutorial. Our protagonist was a man who saw conspiracies everywhere. The government, the media, and most importantly for our story, the entire medical establishment. He believed that doctors and dentists were just glorified salespeople, pushing unnecessary treatments and expensive drugs. So, when he developed a severe, raging toothache, a molar in the back of his mouth that felt like a tiny demon was doing construction work on his jaw, he wasn't about to go to a dentist. That was for sheep. He was a free thinker, a man who believed in taking matters into his own hands. His plan was a beautiful, terrifying symphony of rugged individualism and breathtaking stupidity. He was going to perform his own dental surgery in his garage. His surgical tools were not scalpels and precision drills. They were a pair of rusty old pliers from his toolbox. His anesthetic wasn't a carefully measured dose of Novocaine. It was a half-empty bottle of cheap whiskey. He probably took a few healthy swigs for courage, the fiery liquid a poor substitute for actual pain relief, and got to work. He stood in front of a dusty mirror, his mouth pried open, the pliers in his hand, and began to fish around for the offending molar. It was probably a gruesome, bloody, and incredibly painful process. But he was determined. He was a warrior, battling the phantom menace of modern dentistry. After what must have felt like an eternity of grunting, sweating, and probably a fair bit of screaming, he succeeded. He managed to get a solid grip on the tooth. He twisted, he pulled, and with a sickening crunch that echoed in the quiet garage, the tooth came free. He held it up in the pliers, a bloody, mangled trophy of his victory over the establishment. He had done it. He had beaten the system, but his triumphant celebration was cut short by a few new and much more alarming sensations. First, the incredible, searing pain in his jaw, which was far worse than the original toothache. In his brutal pliers-first approach, he had not just extracted the tooth, he had fractured his own jawbone. Second, and more critically, there was the blood. A lot of it. He had caused a severe, uncontrolled bleed, and the warm, metallic taste was now filling his mouth. He probably tried to stop it, stuffing paper towels into the wound, but it was no use. The whiskey, which he had used as an anesthetic, was also a blood thinner, making the situation exponentially worse. He had successfully removed his tooth, but in the process, he had created a much bigger problem that his pliers and his whiskey couldn't solve. He had been so determined to prove that he didn't need a doctor that he ended up creating a situation where only a team of highly trained surgeons could have possibly saved him. 2. The story of the man who decided to weaponize his vacuum cleaner is a beautiful illustration of what happens when a simple pest control problem is solved with a solution that is both incredibly clever and catastrophically, biblically stupid. Our scene is a quiet, suburban home in Arizona. Our hero, a man who saw himself as a bit of a DIY genius, had a problem. A buzzing, angry, and potentially painful problem. A large beehive had taken up residence under his back porch. Now, a normal person would call a beekeeper. But our hero was not a normal person. He saw this as an opportunity to innovate. He looked at the hive, then at his trusty, powerful shop vac, and a brilliant, terrible idea was born. He wasn't going to spray the bees, he was going to inhale them. His plan was to use the immense suction of his vacuum cleaner to suck up the entire hive, bees and all. It was a clean, chemical-free, and in his mind, humane solution. So, he put his plan into action. He ran a long extension cord, fired up the shop vac, and with the roar of a jet engine, he began his assault. And it worked. It worked beautifully. He successfully sucked up the entire hive. Thousands of angry, confused, and now very compressed bees into the canister of his vacuum cleaner. He probably stood back, admiring his work, feeling like a modern-day Ghostbuster. He had won. The bee problem was solved, but now he had a new problem, a vacuum cleaner full of thousands of very, very angry bees. What do you do with that? He decided to just put it away. He unplugged the shop vac, dragged it inside, and stored it in a small enclosed kitchen closet, probably thinking he'd deal with the bee-filled canister later. Later that night, his wife, completely unaware that the Hoover in the closet had become a buzzing, vibrating prison for an entire swarm of furious insects, decided to do a little light cleaning. She noticed some spilled sugar on the kitchen floor. She went to the closet, pulled out the shop vac, and plugged it in. The moment she flipped the on switch, two things happened. First, the powerful motor roared to life, creating a cyclonic vortex inside the canister. Second, and more importantly, the vacuum's exhaust port, which is usually just for blowing out warm air, became a cannon, a bee cannon. The entire furious, sugar-crazed swarm was blasted out of the exhaust port in a single, biblical plague of buzzing, stinging rage. They filled the small, enclosed kitchen in an instant, a swirling, angry tornado of vengeance. They had been sucked up, trapped, and then suddenly blasted into a room that smelled like their favorite food. They were not in a good mood. The couple was found the next day, a tragic testament to a pest control plan that was perfectly executed, right up until the moment it wasn't. 3. The burglar who was defeated by a doggy door is a classic story of criminal miscalculation, a tale that proves that sometimes the biggest obstacle to a successful heist isn't a high-tech alarm system, but a simple plastic-flapped hole in the door. Our protagonist is a burglar in Belgium, a man who was probably very good at some parts of his job, but, as it turns out, very, very bad at estimating his own physical dimensions. He had targeted a house, but was having trouble getting in. The windows were locked, the doors were solid, but then he saw it. His way in. A small, unassuming doggy door at the bottom of the back door. To him, it wasn't an exit for a poodle. It was an entrance for a professional. He probably thought, I'm skinny enough, I can make that. So he got down on his hands and knees and began his daring and deeply undignified infiltration. He pushed his head through first. Then, with a bit of a shimmy, he managed to get his shoulders through. He was halfway there. He was in. But then he hit a snag, a big snag. His hips, or his chest, or maybe just his own inflated sense of his own slimness. He got stuck. Hopelessly, utterly, and comically stuck. He was wedged in the doggy door, halfway in and halfway out, unable to move forward, unable to move backward. He was a human cork in a dog-sized bottle. His initial frustration probably turned to a dawning, claustrophobic panic. But his situation was about to get so much worse. As he was wriggling and struggling, he attracted the attention of the homeowner. And the homeowner was a beautiful but very large and very territorial Doberman Pinscher. The dog, probably woken from a pleasant nap, trotted over to the back door to see what all the commotion was about. And there, in its own personal doorway, it found a brand new, very interesting, and very conveniently trapped chew toy. It was a burglar's worst nightmare. The dog probably tilted its head, confused for a moment, and then decided this was the best day of its life. It had a captive audience, or more accurately, a captive meal. We don't know exactly what happened in the next few hours. The police report was likely a masterpiece of clinical understatement, probably using words like extensive injuries and defensive wounds. But let's just say the Doberman was not interested in a friendly game of fetch. Our burglar had been so focused on getting into the house that he never stopped to consider who or what might already be living there. And his final fatal mistake was choosing a point of entry that made him the perfect, stationary target for the home's very effective, four-legged security system. And just to add one final brutal footnote to his failed career, let's just say that whatever the dog did, it was thorough enough to ensure that he wouldn't just be removed from society, but from the gene pool, permanently. 4. There are certain household problems that whisper, call a professional. And then there are problems that scream it, like a backed-up septic system. But for a man in Texas, the screams of reason were drowned out by the proud, confident voice of his own inner DIY genius. He had a stubborn clog, a serious blockage somewhere in the dark, mysterious underworld of his home's plumbing. Instead of calling a plumber, an act he probably saw as a sign of weakness and a waste of good money, he decided to wage his own personal war on the clog. His approach was not one of finesse. It was one of overwhelming chemical and pyrotechnic force. First, he went to the store and bought the most powerful, most corrosive drain cleaner he could find, the kind with a skull and crossbones on the label that's probably illegal in several countries. He poured the entire gallon down the toilet. When that didn't immediately solve the problem, he decided to escalate. He then poured a gallon of industrial-strength bleach down the toilet as well. What our amateur chemist didn't know is that when you mix drain cleaner, which is often ammonia-based, with bleach, you create a chemical reaction that releases a dense, choking cloud of toxic chloramine gas. The bathroom was now a makeshift gas chamber, but he wasn't done. The clog was still there, mocking him. He decided it was time to bring in the heavy artillery. For good measure, he was going to try to dislodge the clog with a lit road flare. His logic was probably that the intense heat and light would somehow scare the clog away? We may never know. He stood in the bathroom, now filled with toxic, invisible gas, and lit the flare, its brilliant red flame cutting through the chemical haze. He dropped the hissing, sputtering flare into the toilet bowl. And in that moment, he introduced an open flame into a small, enclosed space filled with not only toxic gas, but also a highly concentrated cloud of flammable methane sewer gas, which had been backing up from the clog. The result was not a small pop. It was a massive, instantaneous, and catastrophically powerful explosion. The toilet, which had been the focus of his rage, was launched upwards with the force of a rocket, taking our hero, who was standing directly over it, along for the ride. The blast demolished the bathroom, blew the roof clean off, and sent him on a brief one-way trip to the heavens. He had been so determined to clear a clog that he had ended up clearing his entire bathroom and himself from the property. He had successfully solved his plumbing problem. He just wasn't around to flush. 5. The story of the backyard astronaut who built a rocket with a one-way ticket is a tale that perfectly captures the glorious, childlike dream of space travel and the brutal, adult reality of what happens when you forget to plan for the landing. Our protagonist was an amateur rocket enthusiast, a man who saw the stars not as distant points of light, but as a destination. He wasn't content to just build small model rockets. He wanted to build the real thing. In his backyard, he spent years constructing his masterpiece, a massive, powerful rocket, a gleaming testament to his passion and his frankly terrifying lack of professional oversight. But he wasn't just going to launch it. That was for NASA. He was going to ride it. He designed a special open-air platform, essentially a small metal chair, which he welded to the side of the rocket. This was his command module, his cockpit. The day of the launch arrived. He invited his friends and family to witness his historic flight. He put on a helmet, strapped himself into his chair, and with a triumphant wave, he initiated the countdown. The rocket engine roared to life, shaking the very ground, and with a massive plume of fire and smoke, it lifted off. And it worked. It worked perfectly. The rocket shot into the sky, a beautiful, majestic testament to his engineering skills. He was soaring, climbing higher and higher, the world shrinking below him. He was an astronaut, a pioneer, a man touching the face of God on a throne of his own creation. He probably felt a sense of pure, unadulterated ecstasy, the ultimate thrill. But as he reached the apex of his flight, several thousand feet in the air, a small, critical, and entirely overlooked design flaw in his plan became apparent. He had spent years designing a system to get him up. He had spent zero time designing a system to get him down. There was no way to detach his platform from the rocket. There was no parachute. There was no escape plan. He had designed a perfect ascent module, but had completely forgotten about the whole return to Earth part of the equation. As the rocket's fuel was spent, it began its inevitable, silent, and very fast descent. He was no longer an astronaut. He was a passenger on a multi-hundred-pound lawn dart, and his own backyard was the bullseye. He achieved an impressive altitude, a personal best that no one could ever take away from him. But his return to Earth, at a speed that is politely referred to as terminal velocity, was a brutal and very final reminder that in rocketry, as in life, it's not just about the launch, it's about sticking the landing. 6. The tale of the rooster who was a very slow learner, and then a very fast teacher, is a grim story from the dark and frankly bizarre world of illegal cockfighting, a lesson in what happens when you try to bully a creature into being something it's not. Our hero was a man who fancied himself a big shot in the local cockfighting scene. He had a rooster, a prize-winning bird that was beautiful, healthy, but had one fatal flaw in its owner's eyes. It was a lover, not a fighter. It was a docile, peaceful creature, more interested in pecking at corn than in tearing another bird to shreds. And this infuriated its owner. He saw not a gentle animal, but a failed investment, a feathered coward that was embarrassing him. He decided the rooster didn't need more training. It needed to be toughened up. It needed to learn to be aggressive. And his method for teaching this lesson was pure, unadulterated cruelty. He decided he would train the rooster by repeatedly poking it, prodding it, and tormenting it with a long, sharpened stick. Day after day, he would go into the rooster's pen and jab at the poor creature, trying to provoke a response, trying to awaken some dormant, killer instinct. The rooster, for the most part, just tried to avoid him. But on this particular day, our trainer was more persistent, more aggressive than usual. He cornered the rooster and continued his relentless poking and prodding. And the rooster, a creature that had endured days of torment, finally reached its breaking point. Something inside its tiny bird brain snapped. It was no longer a peaceful farm animal. It was a cornered, furious beast. With a wild, guttural squawk, it flew at him in a feathered explosion of pure rage. The man, who was probably laughing just a second before, was caught completely off guard by the sudden violent counterattack. He stumbled backward in surprise, trying to fend off the bird, which was now a flurry of pecking beak and slashing spurs. He tripped over his own feet and fell, landing hard on his back. And in a moment of beautiful, karmic, and exquisitely painful irony, he fell directly onto the very same sharpened stick he had been using to torment the rooster. The stick, now braced against the hard ground, impaled him. He lay there, pinned to the earth by his own instrument of cruelty, the rooster probably standing triumphantly on his chest. He had wanted to teach his rooster how to be a killer. And in the end, he succeeded. He just didn't realize he was going to be the final exam. 7. The story of the joyrider who was thrown by his own pitch is a beautiful, if tragic, physics lesson in the concept of equal and opposite reactions. A cautionary tale that proves sometimes the most dangerous weapon you have is your own momentum. Our story unfolds on a quiet, suburban street in Ohio late at night. Our protagonist, a young man whom we'll call Kevin, was out with his friends, engaging in that timeless, idiotic pastime of bored youth, mailbox baseball. They were cruising along in a beat-up minivan, taking turns leaning out the window and hurling rocks at mailboxes, cars, and anything else that looked like it would make a satisfying thwack. But Kevin was not satisfied. He was a competitor, an artist. He felt that the confines of the passenger side window were limiting his performance. He couldn't get the proper wind-up, the full, powerful arc he needed to achieve maximum destructive potential. He needed more room to operate. And then, a brilliant, fatally athletic idea struck him. He decided to slide open the minivan's large, heavy side door. This would give him an unrestricted, panoramic field of fire. He would be like a waist gunner on a World War II bomber, only his bombs were rocks and his targets were the mailboxes of innocent, sleeping suburbanites. His friends, probably too drunk or too stupid to object, thought this was a great idea. So, as they were cruising down the street at about 30 miles per hour, Kevin slid the heavy door open with a satisfying rumble. The wind rushed in, a thrilling, chaotic roar. He felt alive, a true warrior of petty vandalism. He reached back, grabbing a particularly large, hefty rock from their ammo pile. This was going to be his masterpiece. He planted his feet, wound up like a major league pitcher about to throw a no-hitter, and with a mighty primal grunt, he unleashed the rock. And in that exact moment, Sir Isaac Newton, who had been patiently waiting in the wings, decided to make a grand entrance. Kevin had put all of his strength, all of his momentum into that powerful forward and sideways throw. And as the law of conservation of momentum dictates, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. The powerful, outward force of his own throw acted like a giant invisible hand, and it propelled him, with beautiful, flawless, and entirely predictable physics, directly out of the open door of the moving minivan. He went from being the pitcher to being the ball. He sailed through the air for a brief, probably very surprising moment before landing with a sickening thud on the hard, unforgiving pavement. He had been so focused on launching his weapon that he had inadvertently turned himself into a projectile. His friends, their joyride suddenly turning into a horror movie, slammed on the brakes. But it was too late. He had been taken out by his own, perfectly executed, weaponized momentum. 8. The story of the man who fixed a 25-cent problem with a 12-gauge solution is a masterpiece of backwoods engineering. A cautionary tale that proves that if the only tool you have is a shotgun, every problem starts to look like a target. Our story takes us to a dusty road in North Carolina, where a man was having a bad day. His old, beat-up pickup truck had died. After a few minutes of frustrated tinkering, he diagnosed the problem. A blown fuse. A simple 25-cent piece of metal and plastic had brought his entire 2-ton machine to a grinding halt. He rummaged through his glove box. No spare fuses. He was stranded. Now, a normal person might try to flag down a passing car or maybe just walk to the nearest auto parts store. But our hero was not a normal person. He was a problem solver, an innovator, a man who saw rules not as laws but as gentle suggestions. He needed to complete the circuit in the fuse box. He needed something that was roughly the right size and could conduct electricity. And as he sat there, stewing in his own frustration, his eyes landed on the box of shotgun shells sitting on his passenger seat. And in a moment of pure, unfiltered backwoods genius, an idea was born. A 12-gauge shotgun shell was roughly the same size as the blown fuse, and it was made of metal. It would fit perfectly. It would conduct electricity. It was, in his mind, the perfect off-label solution. He took one of the live, brass and plastic shells, filled with gunpowder and lead pellets, and went to the fuse box. He popped out the dead fuse, and, with the confident precision of a man who is about to make a huge mistake, he jammed the live shotgun shell into the empty slot. It was a perfect, snug fit. He probably stood back for a second to admire his handiwork, a proud, resourceful innovator who had just saved himself a trip to the store. He had fixed it. He got back in his truck, a triumphant grin on his face, and turned the key in the ignition. And in that instant, the electrical circuit did exactly what it was designed to do. It sent a powerful 12-volt current directly into his improvised, highly explosive fuse. The electrical charge was more than enough to activate the primer in the base of the shotgun shell. The shell didn't just conduct electricity, it detonated. The fuse box, which was located directly in front of the driver's seat, exploded with the force of a small grenade, sending a blast of hot gas, plastic shrapnel, and lead pellets directly into the cab of the truck and into our hero. He had successfully completed the circuit. He had solved his 25-cent problem. He had just turned it into a very final, very loud, and very permanent solution that also happened to solve all of his other problems, like breathing and having a mortgage. 9. The fisherman who declared war on sharks and ended up chumming the water with himself is a story that comes to us from the sun-drenched, predator-filled waters of Florida. A powerful lesson in the importance of respecting the food chain, especially when you're floating on top of it in a small plastic boat. Our protagonist was an avid fisherman, a man who loved the thrill of the catch. But he had a recurring problem, a persistent, toothy nemesis that was ruining his hobby. Sharks. They kept stealing his fish right off the line, a bold and infuriating act of underwater piracy. He was fed up. This was no longer about fishing. This was a matter of principle. He decided to fight back. He wasn't just going to use a bigger hook. He was going to bring a gun to a fish fight. He went out and bought a bang stick, a specialized pole-mounted device that is essentially an underwater shotgun. It's a long pole with a firing mechanism at the end that holds a shotgun shell, and it's designed to fire on contact. It is a very effective and very dangerous tool for deterring sharks. A few days later, he was out in his small boat, and it happened again. He had a big fish on the line, and a shark moved in to steal it. But this time, he was ready. As the shark grabbed his catch, our hero, filled with a sense of righteous fury, grabbed his bang stick. He leaned far over the side of his small, wobbly boat, and with a triumphant, vengeful cry, he jabbed the bang stick at the shark. The device worked perfectly. The moment it made contact with the shark, the shotgun shell fired with a muffled underwater boom. But our hero, in his moment of triumphant revenge, had completely failed to account for a little thing called recoil. The powerful, backward thrust of the underwater explosion was far stronger than he had anticipated. The recoil from the bang stick was so powerful it threw him completely off balance. He teetered for a moment on the edge of his small boat, and then, with a comical windmilling of his arms, he fell overboard, landing with a massive splash directly into the water that was now filled with the blood of his fish and the very angry, and probably now very confused, shark. He was now swimming in his own, personally created, shark-attracting chum slick, surrounded by the very predators he had been trying to deter. He had successfully won his battle against the one shark, but in doing so, he had just rung the dinner bell for every other shark in a 5-mile radius. His quest to protect his catch had ended with him becoming the main course. 10. The story of the man who tried to save 30 seconds and ended up spending the rest of his life is a grim and brutally efficient lesson in workplace safety, a cautionary tale that proves that safety protocols are not written by management to annoy you. They are written in the blood of people who thought they knew a better way. Our story takes place on a busy construction site in China. Our protagonist is a worker, a man who was probably very good at his job, but who had developed a healthy contempt for what he saw as time-consuming safety rules. His tool for the day was an industrial nail gun, a powerful, high-pressure pneumatic device designed to fire 3-inch nails into solid wood with the force of a bullet. He was working along when the gun jammed, a common enough occurrence. The safety protocol for clearing a jam was simple, clear, and non-negotiable. Step 1. Disconnect the high-pressure air hose. Step 2. Then, and only then, attempt to clear the jam. It was a rule designed to prevent a very specific and very final kind of accident. But our hero looked at the air hose. Disconnecting it would take time. He'd have to walk back to the compressor, bleed the line, and then reconnect it all. It would take a whole 30, maybe even 45 seconds. He decided that was too long. He had a shortcut. A better, faster way. He decided he would just clear the jam with the hose still connected, with the gun still fully pressurized and ready to fire. He flipped the gun over, and in a moment of pure, unadulterated, catastrophic stupidity, he stared directly down the barrel to see what the problem was. He saw the bent nail stuck in the chamber. He then took out a screwdriver and began to poke and prod at the jammed nail, trying to dislodge it. He was, in effect, staring down the barrel of a loaded gun and poking the trigger with a stick. As he was poking, the jammed nail suddenly came free. The gun's firing mechanism, which had been held back by the jam, was now clear. The immense pent-up pressure in the airline was instantly released, and the gun did what it was designed to do. It fired. The 3-inch, hardened steel nail was launched from the barrel with incredible force, traveling the very short, very direct distance from the tip of the gun to our hero's eye. His attempt to save 30 seconds of his workday had ended up costing him everything else. He had been so focused on saving a tiny amount of time that he had overlooked the one simple rule that was designed to save his life. Okay, you're the judge and jury. Of all the catastrophically bad decisions you saw today, which one deserves to be crowned the absolute dumbest? I'm not looking for the funniest, I'm looking for the one that made you genuinely question the survival of our species. Cast your vote and defend your verdict in the comments. If you appreciate the verdict, sentence that like button. Subscribe for the next court session.